Welcome, student. Welcome to this presentation on ecosystem services and its relationship with economics. Environmental economics, you know now that it examines the two-way relationship between economics and environment and how to use the tools of economics to understand the use of environmental resources. Somewhere along the line, nations realized that the way these natural resources were being utilized will do more harm to humankind than good. And keeping this in mind, international efforts began to examine this relationship between how human beings live on this earth and how earth and its resources respond to these human activities. The first, the first of its efforts took place in 1972, but after that we find specific convention that is in 1993, which went on to be known as the Convention on Biological Diversity. This Convention on Biodiversity further developed into what is called as the Millennium Ecosystem Framework. The purpose of this Millennium Ecosystem Framework was to examine the working of the ecosystems in particular. This was initiated by the General Secretary of United Nations then, Mr. Kofi Annan, in 2001. And what was the focus of this MEA, that Millennium Ecosystem Services? It was published in 2005. Let's look at the focus of this report. The first thing is, how have human beings altered the existing ecosystems? One. Two, and then examine how this altered ecosystem is now affecting human beings. Thereafter, the question is, how can the ecosystem be preserved in its pristine form? So, what can the local governments, the national governments, and international bodies do to preserve these ecosystems? Now, when we connect economics to the ecosystem, it is very clear that we are depending upon these ecosystems to provide us resources so that we can use those resources to produce goods and services, which in turn will improve the quality of living of people. So that is the way. But then economics also get interested because any alteration in the ecosystem beyond its capacity is also likely to cause harm to human beings in very many forms. That is how the economics of environment looks at ecosystem and see what can be done to reduce this burden on environment. This particular video will examine ecosystems, its components, what are the types of ecosystems, what are the services that ecosystems provide, and then what can happen to the ecosystem if we continue to use ecosystems beyond its natural capacity. So now let's look at what is ecosystems. So if you look at what is this ecosystem, we understand ecosystem as a very complex natural arrangement. Now this natural arrangement has got plants, it has got animals, it has got microorganisms. These are the living elements or elements with life, and on the other hand we have a geographical area. We have got earth, the sun, the wind, the water, the soil. All of this are the non-living component of the ecosystem. So these plants and animals and microsystems, microorganisms interact in these geographical space that is given. So these in while they interact with each other, each of these elements have got a particular role to play. They depend on each other for their survival and for their growth. There is also a large variety of species of animals, of plants, of microorganisms, each having a particular role to play, and all put together we see what is known as an ecosystem. This ecosystem in turn has got a capacity to take care of the plants, animals, or the microorganism of that particular region. So, which would mean that the animals that live in the desert or the plants that grow in the desert will not grow in another land which has got more rainfall. So, each set of animals, plants, and microorganisms are suited for that geographical area. So, anything that disturbs this geographical area is a matter of concern. Other thing that we need to understand about this ecosystem is that it is very complex and it is dynamic as well. It keeps changing. So any change taking place outside affects the relationship among these various components of this ecosystem. There is therefore a need for us to understand, appreciate this kind of relationship that exists between them, and then see how we can preserve this diversity of species, this diversity of life that exists in different ecosystems. Now let's look at the types of ecosystem. There are different types of ecosystems, and some of these ecosystems are made by human beings and some are natural. For example, the cultivated farmland and the urban parks that you can see in the picture are made by human beings, whereas the coral structure, the desert, the wetland, the grasslands are natural ecosystem. Each of these ecosystem harbors different kinds of animals, plants, and microorganisms, and any destruction of these ecosystems will cause loss of well-being to humanity as well. Broad ecosystems have certain functions to perform. The soil has a certain function, or air has certain functions, or the sunlight has a certain function to perform. So when the ecosystem functions, then it gives us certain services. That is what is known as ecosystem services. Looking at the kind of services that ecosystem provides, we can understand that all the services are hidden. They are so gentle and they happen in such a subtle way that we don't even recognize that these services are being provided to us. The first one is that of the supporting services. Now, in the case of supporting services happen on their own, and these are necessary for production and maintenance of all other forms of life itself. The plant through its process of photosynthesis, the microbes through its processes of decomposition of matter, or of the nutrient recycling, and of soil formation. These are very important ecosystem services that provide us and we get the benefit of. All that we need to do is to imagine if these microbes were not there to decompose the dead matter, how expensive it would have been for a neoclassical economist to put that into money terms and say that this is the amount of money or the allocation of resources that we have to do so that this decomposition can be carried on by human processes. It's very expensive if we convert them into money. It is just that we have not considered money value for these kind of services because we get them free. Second one is the provisioning services, which is much easier for us to understand because it is visible. In that sense, we get our fresh water for the plant and animals, and for human beings it talks about the very many biochemical processes, resources that are available to us. It talks about the many genetic resources that are available, the food, the animal products that are available, the animal shell, the animal fur, the timber, the all of these are again provided by nature. We can also see how nature helps in maintaining temperature. So the animals that live on the ice cap, like what we see in the picture, they can never live in any other place. They cannot be taken from that land and lived anywhere because they need that temperature. So this temperature for each region is again maintained by nature. Then we also find that pollution, that the pollutants that we release in the nature is also cleaned up to a large extent by the ecosystem. What we need to know is that there is a limit beyond which nature cannot regenerate itself, or beyond a certain level it cannot clean itself up. So that limit, which is called the carrying capacity of these natural systems, we should not be destroying that capacity. And once we destroy that capacity, we are actually destroying the ecosystem of that place. It's we are providing, we are getting from the ecosystems. These regulating services maintain life itself. It could be related to climate regulation, it is the carbon storage, it could be the soil filtration process, or the recycling of water. All these are systems given by services given by the ecosystem. On the picture, you can see how the vegetation can absorb uh, noise pollution, how the mangroves can prevent strong winds from destroying life and property. It can be the soil erosion that can be prevented because the roots hold on to the soil. So these are services which are not often recognized, and we do not value them because we don't understand them fully well. Then we have the butterflies, the bees, the bumblebees, the bats. All these creatures are great pollinators. If they were not pollinating, then we can imagine the amount of work that each farmer would have to spend on pollinating their flowers to get the crop that they desire. In fact, when the vanilla plants are pollinated by the farmers, it becomes a very costly crop because a particular bee that pollinates vanilla does not exist in India. These pollination services are invaluable to the life itself, because if human beings had to do all of them manually, it would have been a very expensive affair. So these are done for free from nature. The fourth essential service is that of providing cultural services, which MEA 2005 say that it is of non-material nature. It could be for spiritual enrichment, it is for cognitive development, it is for reflection, for recreation, and for aesthetic experience. If we look at ourselves, we will find that much of the learning that we did at the school level is based on nature. We are discovering nature all through. So, the sciences that we study, what is the function of these sciences? All these sciences are attempting to discover nature. So, the methods that we study, the processes that we want to study, the relationships that we want to study, among many things that we do at higher levels of learning, actually originates from understanding the basics of nature. And therefore, the formal education system itself is based on unraveling these mysteries of nature. Understanding how the different sciences have developed also depends upon the nature and the ecosystem that it provides. Ecosystems also provide a sense of belonging. We belong to a particular place. We have a cultural identity that is related to that particular place. So people living in seaside have a different culture than the people living near highlands or people living in hill stations. So the food habits, the clothes that they wear, the cuisines that they have, all of them become different simply because the ecosystems are different. So ecosystem forms the basis of formation of these kind of provides cultural identity and also provides cultural diversity. Ecosystem is an inspiration for art. You can see many of the art, the paintings, the murals, the designs that we see are all originating from nature. Otherwise, the entire aesthetics, that the entire art that we know, the folklores that are related to space and region, the symbols that we use for as national symbols, they all originate from nature. So ecosystem provides us with these kind of resources to see the development of art, the songs, the dance forms, the costumes that we wear. All of this originate from the ecosystem that we are familiar with. It also provides us the background for the architecture that is used to build the house to protect against harmful animals or to protect itself against flood. All these are originating again from the ecosystem. It also provides the physical, emotional, and mental benefits. So when we go to lands, areas which are serene, which are calm, which are refreshing, people feel that there is a sense of fulfillment in them, there is a spiritual fulfillment in them, or they feel good about it, because mental health is equally important. And these kind of places provide this much needed break away from the busy life that people lead. It also The ecosystem also inculcates aesthetic values in us. Aesthetic values because of the color, the rhythm, the hue, the size, the harmony, all of these what we use later in our life in day-to-day living originates again from nature. So nature teaches us about this harmony and rhythm. It also becomes a basis for recreation. So the tourism that we are seeing, the ecotourism that we are talking about, all these are again free gifts of nature. So nature is very benevolent. Nature has provided so many benefits which are free to human beings. But the question is, how have we as human beings utilized these services? Most of the time these services are not even recognized. We don't even recognize that these are available to us, and we use these ecosystem services to suit us the way we want to benefit from them. But when we harm the ecosystem, we should know that we are harming humanity itself. This ecosystem must be preserved. For what? As a student of economics, because it will harm human life itself. It will reduce the human choices. It will reduce the freedom. A big example we can take is the cutting down of trees, because we have to widen the roads or we have to build new roads. What happens to the birds and animals that were dependent on that tree? What happens to the many insects that were dependent on that tree? We have destroyed them once for all. So we have destroyed a huge number of birds that have been killed because their nesting place has been destroyed. When this when the trees are cut, the roots of the trees which was holding on to the soil, they have become loose, and landslides is a common occurrence. So are floods. Now when we transgress into the forest areas, we are getting into the habitat of wild animals. These wild animals have lost their habitat, and then they transgress into human settlement. The kind of damage that creates to human life and property is something that we know that happens. So the indulgence into the ecosystem with an end for economic gain actually in the long run does more harm to human life than doing good. So it reduces the freedom that we can have, it reduces the choices that we can make, because over time they will become more harmful for human beings than being helpful. So this ecosystem has to be maintained, because we need to maintain good social relations among people. We need to maintain diversity of cultures, and we need to maintain the safety and security of people. Preventing the destruction of ecosystem is the prime responsibility of human beings. Though we use the system, we should see that these resources are used in the most careful manner. These resources don't have any substitute. There are no substitutes available for ecosystems, and all these services have got economic value. So thank you very much. The next video we shall look into what are the drivers of changes in these ecosystem. So thank you. Please to subscribe to this channel and share it with your friends.